Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa Lang, and I did my research paper on the Jim Beam warehouse fire. Jim Beam is a bourbon whiskey brand, and they are owned and manufactured by Beam Suntory. So in July of last summer, one of their warehouses caught on fire due to a lightning strike. The warehouse contained 45,000 barrels of bourbon whiskey, and the fire caused runoff into a nearby river and nearby creeks. It began to kill hundreds of fish. And Jim Beam was able to act quickly and efficiently, started to work with firefighters and environmentalists, and they decided to delay putting out the fire, because if they were to just hose down the fire, it would have caused more runoff into the waterways of, one, more bourbon, and two, lots of chemicals used for firefighting. So there was a delay of 3 days in putting this fire out, and it burned for that long. Environmentalists, Jim Beam, and firefighters also decided to start aerating the water because of all the fish being killed. So they thought aerating the water would help save some of the lives. And aerating is essentially pumping more oxygen into the water. Jim Beam was fined by the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet of $600,000, and they also had to reimburse the Environment Cabinet $100,000. Also, this happened in Kentucky. Unfortunately, there were no signals of impending crisis. Jim Beam had a comprehensive warehouse safety program that had regular inspections and rigorous protocols. So I don't think they had any way of knowing that a lightning bolt was going to hit their building and start a fire. Although there were no signals, Jim Beam did put respectable efforts into their crisis management application. Like I said before, they acted quickly, and another thing that I noticed in my research was that they communicated very liberally to the public and their consumers. They were able to get spokespersons. They had an environmentalist as a spokesperson and an emergency management director, which was very appropriate for this crisis. The company also immediately issued a press release mentioning thanks to the firefighters, environmentalists, everyone's help, saying that they were thankful that there were no deaths or injuries, there were no humans in the building, and they stated their concern for the hundreds of fish that died. In the press release, and all over the news too, they also told consumers that this would not affect shelves, so it would not affect supply, which I think was important to tell their consumers and the public, in case anyone was worried about getting their Jim Beam whiskey. This resulted in Jim Beam losing 6.75 million bottles of bourbon, which seems like a lot, but it's not a lot considering they have millions of bottles throughout Kentucky. So that's why it didn't affect the shelves. Unfortunately, one thing I noticed was that Jim Beam, out of the over a dozen sources I was searching through on my research, I didn't see one that mentioned anything about a Jim Beam boss management being on the scene of the fire at all. I know that they were working with environmentalists and the fire department, and there could have been someone on scene, but none of the press release didn't say that, and none of the news sites said that. And I kind of feel like there was, but I think that's one of the things they should have done differently, was made sure to include that in their press release or in their media sites or have one of the spokespersons say it, because I think it just makes their company look more respectful if someone would have been on the scene. One other thing they could have considered after this, well, back in 2018, one of their warehouses filled with thousands of barrels of bourbon collapsed, and it was also right by a waterway. That resulted in hundreds of fish killed too. So that happened in 2018, and there were no reports of them ensuring the public that something like that wasn't going to happen again, or they weren't showing their efforts of how they were going to make sure that wasn't going to happen again. And then in 2019, this happens. So I think it's kind of hard to move an entire warehouse. I don't know how they would do that, but they might want to consider not having warehouses filled with whiskey bourbon right next to waterways, because this is the second time this has happened to them. But unfortunately, they didn't show anything in their press release or on the media of them reflecting on the crisis and kind of telling the public and consumers what they're going to do to ensure this doesn't happen again. But it's kind of tricky too, because the lightning was kind of like, a lightning strike is very rare. One other thing that they could think of from now on, because this happened, is lightning rods. Kind of look like this. Let me move my face. So I'm not an electrician or an engineer, but so I don't know if this would work for one of their buildings, but this was just an idea that they could use, is installing these lightning rods. So I think when lightning hits the top of the building, it won't zap the building. Here are just more pictures of the debris and the fire. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to my presentation.